Athletes Lives Network exclusive interviews. Today our guest, all-world, all-legend, Byron Duke Florence. How you doing, good Duke?
Pretty good, Kyle. How about yourself?
Doing well. As you know, on our website, our mission is to go around and get everybody's story. You know, you've been a legend of East Chicago, Roosevelt, also Northern Illinois. You know, we'd love to have your story on our website.
Be more than glad to give it to you, too.
Okay. First question is, just give us a little history of who you are and your early influences in sports.
Well, like I said, my name is Byron Richie Florence. I was given the nickname Duke by my grandfather many years ago. He was a baseball fan, and he used to always say I would be his Duke Snyder. And that name subsequently stayed with me. Born and raised in this city. Started out playing sports at an early age. I excelled in baseball, bitty basketball, and Pop Warner football. I've enjoyed the luxury of playing high school football here. I was coached by legendary Chet Lakowski, who really made me understand the value of football. I always prided myself on a couple things he said. You know, there's two kind of athletes: those that can and those that can't. And he would always emphasize, which one are you? And I always determined to be one of those that can. And something that instilled in me tremendously when I went off to college to play ball was, I remember a game when I was just so totally exhausted. I had no energy. Couldn't pick up my head. And it was from conditioning. And he used to always emphasize in practice, you play like you practice. Didn't dawn on me until that game. Kind of took it easy in practice, just went through the motions. And came game time, fourth quarter, couldn't pick my head up. And from that point on, I was determined to make sure that I practiced 10 times as hard as I played. And the game became easy. Those are a couple things that have stuck with me even in today's life. You know, you get out what you put in it. So any athlete out there listening, you play like you practice.
Now, what peers did you grow up with that gave you competition that you try to model your game after being a youngster in Chicago?
I grew up idolizing and actually patterning myself by athletes in my high school years. Kenny Woods, Charlie Woods, Foster Battle, Clifton Hardy, David Warner, played East Chicago, Washington. And these guys were just, they were speedy, quick, and they just made the game seem so smooth and fluid. And I used to pattern myself. You know, when we played in the park, you know, you got into that childhood thing. We didn't like to say, I want to be Gale Sayers or Jim Brown. We idolized ourselves behind the high school guys at that time. And we used to argue, I'm going to be Foster Battle. I'm going to be Cliff Hardy. I'm going to be David Warner. And, you know, we worked at it. We actually worked at it.
Wow. So growing up in the 60s and 70s, well, you know, of course, you know, race played a real important role during that time in athletics at Roosevelt. How did you break the barrier and getting involved in sports and having the opportunity to dominate sports?
I'll tell you something, and that is a very interesting question. Good question. I think a lot of people in East Chicago knew the history of East Chicago. I actually was the backup running back behind Billy Knox, legendary. Played with Chicago Bears, played with Purdue. And I had a coach, Coach Carter. For some reason or another, one day he said, you know what, Byron, you go play on the right side. And the right halfback at that time was Tony Brzezinski. Legendary Pete Brzezinski's son, who was a Hall of Fame coach, athletic director. And he put me there. And from the first day I ran right halfback under Buddy Carr, he was the backfield coach, I never had to relinquish that position for 2 years in high school. My junior and senior year, I was a starting running back. And I was determined that once I got in this position, I was not going to give it up, and I didn't. So, did race play a part back in those days as far as who was playing where and who was playing what? Definitely, no question about it. But you were caught so much up in the game at that time. You kind of didn't want to say race had a lot to do with it. And in certain situations it did. It was still some people that played in positions that I know for a fact, some of my counterparts and some of my friends were far superior, better athletes. Case in point, a guy from East Chicago named Tony Abbott. Played fullback. Could have been one of the best fullbacks that ever come out of this city. Did he get caught up in that situation? Sure he did. But what could I do about it at the time? True, it was a very vital element back in that day.
So how did athletes like yourself, your brothers, Billy Knox, mentally overcome those pressures? Not only of surviving and growing up in the city of Chicago, but just dealing with all that.
I came from a strong, supportive background. My family opened the doors to their home to all the guys that played ball with us. This was like the Haven House. After practices, guys would come here and sleep. They'd come here and eat. After the games, this was a central melting pot. I mean, guys like Tony Valentine, John Verbish, guys from the other part of town, the south side and the north side, that it wasn't kosher to hang out in the black community. These guys hung out in my home, and my family opened the doors to them. It was just a standard procedure after every game, sometimes after practice, to meet here, and we just bonded. So I had a supportive background. I did. My family, my friends, they supported everything we did.
Okay. Let's kind of backtrack a little bit to where you was growing up. What other sports was you involved in? What were you involved in the city of Chicago?
You know what, Carl? And we're going back to anybody that was involved in sports. I was a far superior baseball player than a lot of people recognize or even realize. I was drafted out of high school by the Cleveland Indians. Benny Zentera, who was an agent, he was over the entire Midwest region. He sat right in my mother's living room with me and my dad, and in 1970 offered my family and me a $25,000 signing bonus just to sign to play with Cleveland in the minors, with the idea that if I elected not to go to college, we could increase that to $100,000. This is in 1970, but it was instilled upon me, and either with some encouragement, if you want to call it that, from my father, that he's going to go to school and get an education, and that was emphasized to me. I kind of got away from the game of baseball. I did go to college on a football scholarship, but baseball was probably my, if you want to say it, money sport. And evidently it wasn't meant for me to be.
As you previously stated that you, your junior and senior year, you was starting right halfback. Give us a little insight on your junior season.
Well, I started at safety. We had a 3 defensive back setting there, and I started at safety. I remember the first interception I had, I ran back for a touchdown. And I remember a football game against Hammond High, very critical, because I was the middleman on the kickoff return, and it was kicked off to me, and I fumbled it. And I could just see the water running down my eyes. I could picture Chet Lekowski reaming me out with his hands on both sides of my shoulder pads, shaking me to the point of I'm going to pass out. all this just flashed back in a matter of a microsecond. And I picked it up and I ran 98 yards for a touchdown, untouched.
Wow.
And I think that the incentive and just the idea knowing that I could play at that level, football never was a threat to me at that point. You know, it was just emphasized and instilled upon in me that couldn't nobody beat us. And I pride my coach for that. Senior year, we had a total of 32 football players on our entire team. 32 players. We actually won the conference. We played in the state championship game, the Mythical States Championship game against South Bend, Washington. And we lost, but there were 9 players, maybe 10, I'm not really sure, because Knox did the kickoff, and I'm not sure if the punter, which was Ted Valentine, was on the kickoff team. That's the only time we came out the game. We had to play both ways. But we were conditioned. We realized it. We didn't pout. You know, it wasn't a day of the specialists. If you could play, you played. And it wasn't such thing as getting tired. You know, because it was always suck it up. You know, and mentally they psyched us into believing that we couldn't get tired and we couldn't get beat. Probably one of the better games that I remember. I had a couple of them back in my senior year. It was just absolutely outstanding when I look at it now, because they moved me to quarterback toward the end of the season, just on certain plays. And we had what they call the quarterback left, quarterback right. Simple. Get the ball from center, I run to the left. Get the ball from center, I run to the right. We ran 3 quarterback plays that game against Clark. I ran a 68-yard, a 72-yard, and I think an 80-yard touchdown. It's the quarterback left, quarterback right, and I got one and just took it straight up the middle. So I remember that game very clearly, and probably one of the most memorable in my day at East Chicago Roosevelt was against East Chicago, Washington, the Brown Derby. Every time we played that Brown Derby in my junior and senior year, the conference championship game boiled down to that game. And whoever won that game won the conference, and they had a chance to play in what I call the Mythical State title game. And, this was a game that me and Billy Knox decided we're going to come to the game, and we're going to, just before we got ready to go out, we're going to change our socks and wear long white socks. And if anybody knew Chet Lakowski, if you didn't wear those wool socks that he gave you over those high-top shoes that you could barely see the top of the socks, you didn't wear anything at all. And just before we went out, he said, Knox and Florence, you're on the bench. And we could never figure out what happened, why. So maybe 6-7 minutes into the first quarter, Coach Carr came to us again and said, listen, take those socks off. So we took them off, and Chet looked back at us and saw us and put us in the game. I remember clearly because I had problems getting the sock off my right foot, and I just ripped the socks completely off. But to make a long story short, I scored 4 touchdowns and an extra point in that game, and I think that record stood forever. You know, because eventually the 2 schools combined and they never did play that game again. But that record stood for a long time. I think my brother eventually tied it or broke it in a last season game, but it wasn't called the Brown Derby at that time.